Hello, I'm Warren Hall, the National Manager of Support Services for the American Liver Foundation. The American Liver Foundation is the nation's largest nonprofit serving people with liver disease. We provide a voice and, in many cases, an ear for patients with liver disease, for their family members and friends. And we do this through education, support, research, and advocacy. I want to welcome you to this installment of our Ask the Expert series. We developed this long-running series because we heard and continue to hear from so many people who say they either forgot to ask their doctor a question during their appointment or realized on the way home that there was something that they didn't quite understand. We thought it would be helpful if we brought in medical experts so that people can ask some of those questions or help to understand some aspects of their disease or their treatment. Now, our guest today is not our personal physician, so he may not speak to your exact situation or tell you what to do, for only your own healthcare team can do that. But hopefully all of us will get a better understanding of the complexities of NASH and opportunities that clinical trials may offer. During our meeting today, we encourage all of you to write your questions in the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. Or if you're watching the recording of this video, to put your questions into the Q&A section, because we'll be able to respond to them at a later time. And so now, without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Adnan Saeed is from the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. His practice focuses on advanced hepatology and liver transplantation. So, Doctor, thank you very much for being with us this evening, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Warren. Thanks for the kind invitation and the privilege to talk to all of you. I'll start sharing my screen, and it's a PowerPoint presentation. So I thought I would spend my time today focusing on clinical trials for non-alcohol induced fatty liver disease, or NAFLD as the acronym is. I won't spend too much time going into the disease entity itself, although we'll speak briefly about what NAFLD-NASH is and show a couple of clinical trials there. But I'll spend most of my time introducing what clinical trials are from a participant's perspective or a patient's perspective. What does it mean to be in a clinical trial? What you should be thinking about, questions you should be asking your physicians, or any researchers that ask you to participate in clinical trials. I'd be happy to answer any questions tonight or in the future if somebody wants to forward them. Thanks again for the kind invitation. So non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is a chronic dynamic liver disease. And there's some controversy about the name itself. Naming something by what it's not alcohol is a little controversial. So there is a little push by some members of our clinical community to change the name to what it really is, metabolic associated fatty liver disease. So that tells you that the disease entity of fatty liver disease or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is associated with what we call metabolic syndrome. So it is commonly associated with diabetes and with weight gain. Those are the two commonest conditions where you would see this. Other associations may include high blood pressure, high cholesterol, a particular kind called high triglyceride, and other conditions that may be less common, but we still certainly see, including sleep apnea, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and some other less common conditions. Now, NAFLD is sort of an umbrella term, and the progressive form of the condition in the liver, at least, is called NASH. The acronym means non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, and that's the form of this liver disease where there's inflammation of the liver cells, injury to the liver cells, and scar tissue occurs, which we call technically fibrosis, and that's a concern for cirrhosis. This is in contradistinction to what we call NAFLD or simple steatosis, where there is fat in the liver but no liver cell injury and no scar tissue, no inflammation. And that's a relatively benign condition, at least as far as the liver is concerned. Of course, you have to be careful. Like I said, it's dynamic, so NAFLD can progress to NASH. And so you do have to follow up with your healthcare providers to make sure that things are improving and are not progressing to something more progressive. And why do we care about these biopsy terms, so to speak? That's because NAFLD is the next or is the current big epidemic, as far as I'm concerned, affecting millions of individuals. It's exceedingly common. If you look at just fatty liver itself, in the US, the estimates are anywhere from 25 to 30 million people. Now, not every one of those individuals will develop progressive liver damage, but when they do, this gets scar tissue in the liver, which progresses onwards. And in some people, it may lead to cirrhosis, which is sort of the dreaded complication that we all want to prevent, that can lead to further complications, some of which can be life-threatening. That number in the near future is expected to reach close to 3 million, which is pretty much about the size of what the hepatitis C epidemic was back in the 90s. And given that this is a chronic disease that is still increasing, I am concerned about the impact of this on the health of not just this country but worldwide, and the burden on individuals and on the healthcare system. So it behooves all of us to try and see how we can get ahead of this epidemic. So that brings us to how do we treat NAFLD and what are clinical trials? I will start by informing everyone that there is no FDA-approved medication specifically for this condition of NAFLD. That does not mean that there are not many clinical trials occurring, that they are. It just tells us we have a lot to learn about the disease, and there are medications that are going to be approved in the future. And the best way to get involved in knowing about the disease, treating it, is to get involved through your healthcare provider, your physicians, and to consider participating in research trials if you are so inclined. So simply speaking, what are clinical trials for NAFLD or for any other condition? It's medical research that involves people, volunteers, or participants, as the nomenclature is. Why do we do them? It helps doctors and researchers learn more about the disease, and it improves healthcare for people in the future by coming up with treatment strategies, medications, devices, strategies, diets, lifestyle that are proven to help and not hurt. So those are clinical trials. Right now, as I mentioned, there are many aspects of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease that researchers are studying. Most importantly, they are studying new treatments, some of which are medications, some of which are endoscopic treatments for weight loss, some of which are surgeries, for example. But there are other research going on to understand more about the disease, some of which help us to take care of patients to reduce risk of progression of liver disease, and sometimes in the future develop therapies. And that includes basic research looking at which genes increase the risk for fatty liver disease, as well as when an individual develops liver disease, what is the natural history? How does it develop? Who is likely to progress over time, get worse over time, who is likely to improve, and what we can do to improve this. So there's many kinds of clinical studies happening. Observational studies are studies where we look at health outcomes in a group of participants. So participants may receive intervention, such as medical products or procedures, but researchers are not assigning them that treatment. This is happening through their routine medical care because their provider, their physician said, you should be on this medication for this condition. And then researchers go back and they look at the effect of that medication, that lifestyle on their disease. For example, a group of investigators may look at a group of adults with fatty liver disease to learn what is the effect of different lifestyles on liver health, which may include aspects of diet, aspects of exercise, aspects of sleep, for example, So that's an observational study. A clinical trial is something that is a little bit more rigorous. It is designed to look at whether certain treatments work for a medical condition, so to speak. And the big difference here is that participants receive specific assigned intervention from the researcher according to a very fixed, rigid research protocol or plan. And that's known as the intervention. This could be a medical compound, chemical, drug. It could be a device. It could be a procedure. It could be a diet change. So that's the intervention. And the goal is to compare this new medical approach and test it against a standard one that may already be available to see if it is better, as good, or worse, or sometimes to a placebo, so inactive compound that contains no active ingredients, to see if it is better than just doing regular daily care or to no intervention. And the participants that receive this are called control group in the trial. And why do we do this? It's because when you look at clinical information at the early phases in uncontrolled trials and observations, we are all prone to our biases, and sometimes something that looks very promising, even when we see it being given to individuals, for example, a medication or a lifestyle change, when you actually study it rigorously, you find out it's not helpful at all, may even be harmful, and some other things that you think may not be as helpful turn out to be actually much more helpful. So it is extremely helpful to use this rigorous design to find out whether something that looks promising will actually turn out to be helpful, and how helpful, or if it's harmful or not useful. So in a clinical trial, the investigators, with the help of participants, try to determine both the safety, that's paramount, the safety of the intervention or the medication, as well as the efficacy. Efficacy means how well does it work. And there's a difference between efficacy and effectiveness. Effectiveness is tested once a drug is approved, once it's out in the real world, and we look and see how people are actually doing with it as well. But in a trial, you're measuring how effective a medication, for example, is, and how safe is it. So for example, investigators give a drug to patients who have NASH during a trial to see whether either the liver enzyme improves, or if liver scarring or fibrosis decreases in from this medication compared to a placebo, for example. Now, if you read research trials, or you get invited or to be in a research trial, or think about it, there are different types of study designs. Here's a common one. This is the gold standard of clinical trials. It may seem like a lot of word salad, but I'll try and go through what the words mean. So randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blind study. That is the most rigorous study design that we have to see if a medication or intervention is effective. So what does it mean? So a randomization in a clinical trial means you take a group of individuals or participants who want to be in the trial. You hopefully select people that represent the general population where you would hope that the medication or the device would be used. So people that suffer from a particular condition, for example, NAFLD. The participants that come forward in the trial, let's say 100 participants come forward to be in the trial, their information is put together in a computer, and then the computer has a random algorithm that randomly assigns individuals to either receive the investigational treatment, the intervention group here, or the control treatment, which may be placebo or current standard therapy that's already approved. And if you randomize enough individuals, and there are calculations how many people you need in a study to find the answer, you will find that the groups are similar to each other in terms of their makeup, so to speak, in terms of their age, their race, their ethnicity, other risk factors. So when you compare effectiveness, you're comparing similar groups of people. So that's randomization or a randomized trial. Placebo control simply means that when patients are randomized, they may be randomized to a treatment arm that is trusted and a control arm. And in the control arm, they're getting an inactive compound, placebo, which should have no effect. And so you're really comparing it a treatment effect compared to not using it. And then double blind. So what is double blind? A double blind trial is these compounds or these medications, or maybe they are coded. So when a participant or a patient receives it, they don't know if they are receiving a medication, the intervention, or a placebo. So that's single blind. The patient's researcher or physician may not know either, and that's double blind. And why is that important? That's important so as to not introduce bias. So if you're trying to assess an outcome, if you're trying to assess how effective a treatment is, and let's say one of the things you want to look at is, does it reduce pain, for example? Well, if either the doctor or the patient knows that somebody is getting an active medication, they may have a bias and they may ask the question a different way, or they may have an effect on them mentally where they feel that their pain is better controlled since they're receiving the active medication compared to placebo. So it's important not to know what you're receiving. Now somebody has to know, and the researchers know, and sometimes it's the sponsor that knows, or there's a group called a safety monitoring board that knows. And after the trial is complete, they unblind the study. They release the code, so then you can compare people in the right group, the control versus the intervention. So it's not that we would never know. But this is the most rigorous kind of study design that helps us answer the question: is intervention or medication effective for what it's being tested for or not? There are different kinds of phases of clinical trials that you may hear about and that you may be interested or asked to participate in. They are used in drug development. These are mandated or defined by the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, mostly to make sure that medications go through an appropriate approval protocol and that things are done safely for participants. And we have confidence in a medication that is approved. And the process in the United States is extremely rigorous, more so than in many other countries. So I would feel really confident asking anybody or being in a study as a study participant myself sometimes. So the different phases of a clinical trial are starting from phase 1 all the way to phase 4. This is the pathway. So how does something reach a clinical trial? It all starts with an idea or a hypothesis, right? There are studies, sometimes in animal models, you test these compounds, or in test tubes and cell lines that show effectiveness against a particular disease, for example, fatty liver disease, or a particular component of fatty liver disease, or something effective against a hepatitis virus or a cancer cell. There may be studies where this compound was used for something else, and then people reported that it seems to have effect on this other condition as well. And so this is sort of the idea or hypothesis generating phase, preclinical studies and non-clinical trial research. From there, the ideas that show merit move on to human studies. And phase 1 are really small studies. The main goal of those studies are to determine if the medication, for example, is safe rather than effectiveness. You may look at certain signals to see if it is effective or not, but by no means would you be able to prove that this is effective for the condition after a phase 1 study. The main goal is to find a dose that seems to be potentially beneficial, and most importantly, the right dose that is not harmful? How do we go about finding that dose? Some of it is based on preclinical studies and our prior knowledge of what doses should be based on a lot of factors. Drugs that are shown to be safe in phase 1 move on to phase 2. So phase 1 are really small studies, about 100 participants, for example. Some are a little bigger. Phase 2 studies may go up to 100, 200, 300, 500 participants. There, people continue studying, investigators continue studying whether the particular drug or therapy works. So there is a little bit more rigor in terms of looking for signals of effectiveness. For example, for fatty liver disease, is it working to reduce inflammation or scar tissue or liver enzymes? Or does it work for in a cancer study for a particular type of cancer? If the answer is yes, this is enough to move it to phase 3 as long as it remains safe. And so safety monitoring is key as well. Again, a phase 2 study will not prove if it is completely effective, and the FDA won't approve it after a phase 2 study. Phase 3 studies are the large studies, well over 1,000 individuals for a lot of chronic conditions. These are many thousands of individuals that are randomized, like we talked about, into the treatment arm and the control arm that compare the new drug. And this is the one where you really continue to look at both safety, and this is the final answer, whether a drug is effective for what it's being used for. How you define effectiveness, of course, varies from condition to condition. And there's another phase called a phase 4 study that is done really after a drug is approved out in the market, and drug companies may choose to study it once it's used by hundreds of thousands of individuals, for example, to make sure that it remains effective and there are no side effects that were not picked up when you tested it in 5,000 individuals, for example. So they all have their merits and their uses. And there have been landmark studies, too many to count here. Some of the ones that we've been involved with in recent years include the landmark hepatitis C medication that have really allowed us to treat effectively hepatitis C in the US. Cholesterol treatments that a lot of us may be familiar with. Patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease certainly have risk factors to be on statins, and it's safe to use them in many of those patients. Cancer treatments, vaccine with COVID-19, we've all heard about the vaccine trials, and some of us have been participants as well. So why would somebody wish to participate in a clinical trial? There are many reasons. This is not a completely inclusive list. People may have their own reasons, motivations, and desires, and there are many reasons. It can be a great way to access cutting-edge therapy for people who are interested. It may have a positive effect on one's outcome, but of course, there's no guarantee of that because the intervention may not work. Or you could be maybe in a placebo arm as well. Having said that, there is often concern from patients about how safe is it to try something that has not been tested out in the general public, for example. And I can tell you, nobody is monitored more carefully than a participant in a research trial. So as opposed to clinical care, those participants in a clinical trial have more monitoring, more lab monitoring, more doctor's visits, all to make sure that we really carefully pay attention to safety, the participant safety, while we're looking at efficacy as well. So if you are diagnosed with a chronic condition such as NAFLD or any other chronic condition, I can say with a great degree of confidence that there is no safer place to be in general than in a clinical trial that is carefully monitored and well run. Other reasons may be that the therapy or drug may be better than the current standard of care regimen. So you'll have maybe a leg up on that. And then some people have very altruistic motivations. They want to help advance scientific knowledge and human health in general and their fellow human beings. And that's really the majority of people I know that participate in clinical trials. So what are the nuts and bolts of clinical research? Things to know about. When you decide to participate in a research trial, pay particular attention to what the protocol or the research plan is. This is a detailed document that describes in detail what the study design is. Is it a randomized trial? Is it double blind? Is it placebo controlled? Is it phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and other aspects? What are the interventions? What is being studied? How are they assigned, randomly or not? What are the tests that you will have to undergo? Are those tests something that you feel comfortable with, ask questions about? And what is the commitment from you? What is the duration of follow-up? The number of visits? How do you monitor? How do you get monitored? And how to reach out to people if you have questions, including research personnel, and how to contact them at any point. So the research plan or the protocol includes all that information. It also includes in what are called inclusion and exclusion criteria. So when medications or products are studied in trials, they may have certain rigorous criteria where they include certain individuals. So an example, and they don't include certain other individuals for safety reasons predominantly, or maybe because they want to study only that group of individuals for that particular medication. So for example, a study for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease medication may include adults to begin with, ages 18, nobody that's younger. Some have upper age limits as well. Diabetes type 2 should be controlled. So they will tell you what your A1C should be. There should be some evidence of fatty liver on imaging or a biopsy. And then they may ask for one or several of these factors that the participant must be overweight by body mass index or weight, have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, which is a kind of lipid or fat in the blood, and have a diagnosis of NASH, which often requires a liver biopsy in some individuals. Although now more and more we are doing this non-invasively using some blood biomarkers or tests like FibroScan, which is a non-invasive ultrasound-like test. The exclusion criteria are also important. So you should look through this as well to make sure you can participate and there is not a reason for you not to come forward, although the investigators will also look at this as well. So generally studies early on exclude participants who may be pregnant or breastfeeding to protect the fetus or young children, unless the study is specifically looking at that population. People who have a history of allergies to either of the study medication or their components. Patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. If you're looking in studies to study purely just non-alcohol induced fatty liver disease, you will of course exclude people who have a history, especially recent, of alcohol dependence or abuse, who have other liver diseases right now that are untreated, like hepatitis B or C, for example. And these are just some of the things to look for before you reach out to the study team. Where do these studies occur? They can occur in many locations, depending on what the question is asked for. They, of course, happen in universities. They happen in doctor's office, private practices, community-based clinic. Some of them can happen in the home as well. It depends on who's conducting the study and what is the question being asked. How long does it take? It also depends on what is the question being asked. So that's an important one to look at and ask. How long is my participation, and how long is it during an intense follow-up phase? And then sometimes these studies go on for much, much longer, but the time commitment from participant becomes less as time goes on. So some of these studies, especially early on, can be short, weeks or months. And then over the long run for chronic conditions like NAFLD, they can be long for years to make sure that we are benefiting patients over the long run and that efficacy and safety last. participants should be told, and they will be told how long the study will last. What are the teams involved in clinical research? The participant, the patient, of course, is at the center of everything. The research study team involves who is somebody who is known as the principal investigator. Often there are a group of sub-investigators. These are healthcare providers, physicians, or other healthcare providers that are responsible for carrying out the clinical trial. They carry the ultimate responsibility in their center. There may be a clinical research nurse who collects information about your medical conditions, may collect blood, other samples. A research coordinator who helps explain the study protocol, answers questions, gets consent, helps manage data safely, and that is a really important person to get to know. And depending on the study, other personnel may be involved, like lab coordinators, social workers, radiologists, and so on and so forth. So when you're thinking about participating in a research study, all clinical research trials involving humans and animals, but particularly humans, should have sound ethical principles, and these are the four most important ones. The principle of beneficence means that you are studying something that is likely to have much more benefit than cause any risk. And the flip side of this is non-maleficence. So the risk from that intervention, especially serious risk, is much lower than the potential of benefit that is being tested. Autonomy is exceedingly important. This means that the participant or the patient has all the rights to participate in the study or not without fear of any punitive action or unfair or unjust treatment from their providers, and they have the right to withdraw from a study at any time. They should be given all the information in language that they understand, nothing too technical or jargony or something that they can understand fully, and then the consent in writing to what is being asked of them. And then justice, which means that you are studying a medication or a compound or a procedure in a group of individuals where the entire group that is at risk for that disease have equal opportunity to be involved in this research, and that one group does not get excluded unfairly, or the flip side, get undue burden of participating in research and take all the risk, and the other group does not. And there's been in the past, distant past, examples where this has not always been followed. The Tuskegee trials and other ones in this country, and the Nuremberg trials are examples of that. And because of that, we have really sound medical principles such as these, which are now very closely followed to make sure things are done safely. So what is informed consent? It's in the name, right? You should be closely informed, completely informed, and you have to consent to be in a study. This is underlying this. The principle of autonomy underlies this, right? The consent form should have a layman's language explanation of what the study is, what is the purpose, and what is the study doing. It should include the potential benefits. It should include all the risks. It should tell you how your confidentiality is maintained, and it should explicitly tell you that you have the right to withdraw at any time. So informed consent to be in a study is not a binding contract where once you're in the study, if you're uncomfortable, you cannot withdraw. You certainly can. You should discuss it with your investigator and with your team if you have any concerns, and they can sometimes alleviate those concerns so you don't have to, but you have the right. And so that's all in the informed consent form. How are participants or patients in a clinical trial protected? There's always an element of unknown, right, when you're in a clinical trial. And so there are certain protections that are standard. Like I just mentioned, this is always voluntary. You can always withdraw, and it should not impact your clinical care, even if the investigator is your main physician. In addition, the trial is monitored by external agents, including not only the investigator, but the sponsor who's funding the trial. Now, both of them have potential for bias, although they try to minimize it. So there are other groups that monitor it. An important one is the Institutional Review Board, or IRB, a group of individuals that monitor trial for safety, and I'll tell you who that comprises. Data Safety Monitoring Board. Costs should be explained ahead of time. And of course, if there are any side effects, bad side effects that are related to the study medication that have impact, the IRB often makes determination as to whether participants should be made aware, even if anybody else in the trial has a side effect. Not necessarily every side effect, but definitely things that are of concern. So what are IRBs, or Institutional Review Board? These are a group of doctors, researchers, and members of the general community or the general public that sit on this in each university or each medical center, and they review each protocol coming from other individuals to make sure that these are appropriate, safe, and they follow all the principles that I talked about. The most important is to make sure that the research risks are minimized and reasonable in relationship to any potential benefits. There are also some clinical studies in particular also are monitored by what's known as data monitoring committees. These are a group of individuals, physicians, scientists, nurses, other providers who sit on these boards, and they look at outcomes happening in control and intervention groups. And if they see any concerning signals happening, they are unblinded, and they inform the investigators and the sponsor that there are some concerning things happening here. This is the action you should take. Sometimes they find the opposite. They find that a medication tested is extremely effective, so effective that you should stop testing it anymore and approve it, and they say that as well. And of course, there are various federal agencies that audit research offices periodically, including the Office of Human Subjects Research Protection, FDA, as well. So you can be reassured that there are a lot of safety protocols built in trials. Important question, what is the relationship to your usual healthcare? So typically, when you are enrolled in a clinical study, you will continue to see your regular, usual healthcare providers. The trials are testing a particular product in a particular medical condition. They do not provide complete healthcare or extended healthcare for other conditions, and sometimes not even for other aspects of that condition. So you should continue to follow with your regular healthcare provider and maybe involve them in that decision as well. So questions to ask. So you should think about asking these questions if you are interested. So what is being studied? What is the medication? What is the device? What are you actually studying to see if it works? So that's an important, simple question. Second question, why do researchers believe that an intervention being tested might be effective? And why do you think it might not be effective? And has it been tested before? Can you briefly explain the results to me as to what they showed and why is it interesting to study this? What are the possible interventions that I could receive during the trial? Exactly what is it? How is it administered? Is it a pill? Is it an IV? Is it a procedure? How do you determine what do I receive the intervention? Is it by chance, the randomized trial, for example, or not? How will I know which intervention I received during the trial? Will I know? Or is it double blind or single blind? Will you know? And what are the risks, side effects, potential risks. They should all be laid out in the consent form, even minor ones, and the benefits of this trial. How do you monitor for those, and how do they compare compared to my current treatment or to my disease itself? What testing do you do? What procedures are involved? How often do I have to visit the clinic, hospital, lab? How long will it last? And so the study can show you a whole calendar going over, 1, 2, 3 years as to what your participation will look like. Is there payment for my participation? Some trials, depending on the funding and depending on the intensity, do pay for your time. The payment is usually not enough to feel that it's coercive or that people may participate just because the payment is so much, but it's sort of more a token or acknowledgement of your time. Will I be reimbursed for other expenses like travel, for example? And what is the long-term care? Is it part of this trial? Do I get the results of the study once they are published or reported? Usually at that point, yes. Who oversees my medical care when I'm participating in the trial? So researchers usually oversee the study part itself, the safety part of it, and the efficacy part of it. But like I said, your usual healthcare provider should remain involved if they are different people. What are your options if you have a side effect or if you are injured by being in the study? What kind of healthcare options do you have? Does insurance cover this? Does the study cover it? Many studies look at this in particular, and they say certain things they cover, certain things they leave it up to your health insurance, and that's very explicitly mentioned in the study itself. So they look and make sure that you have that coverage. And then how do you find clinical trials for the condition that you may have, that your loved one may have, or that you're interested in? Important resources: asking people you trust, asking your physicians, asking your healthcare providers. You can do your own research. You can look at your medical center websites in the community where you are or in the state where you are. Often they have research offices in those organizations. You can look those offices up and see if they have a website publicizing research. You can often find recruitment advertisements online in the local newspaper, TV, radio, sometimes flyers. You can go on this website, clinicaltrials.gov, through the federal government, where all clinical trials have to be registered. And I'll show you some examples where you can find your condition and see what's being studied. You can look at the National Institute of Health, VA for FDA, CDC, and other organizations. The American Liver Foundation, for example, regarding fatty liver disease. So I won't go over the particular ones, but just to show you how much activity there is in this field. Like I said, there is nothing FDA approved specifically for fatty liver disease, but these are all the agents that have been tested in recent years, some of which are still being tested and moving through different phases for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, working on reducing inflammation, cell death, scar tissue. And many research activities happening in clinical trials. Some of them are more advanced than others. An example of this is an agent in phase 3 trial, which has potential beneficial effects on glucose tolerance, reducing fat in the liver, and possibly even on reducing scar tissue. So this is being tested, something called an FXR agonist. There's another one for diabetes, what's known as a GLP-1 receptor agonist, that has shown to be not only beneficial for diabetes, but in patients with fatty liver disease, maybe improvements in liver inflammation, not in fibrosis, and weight loss, so some benefit. And if you go on that clinicaltrials.gov site, you can search, you can put your condition in. It's a pretty easy site. You can put in NAFLD, And then you can say phase 1 if you're interested in phase 1 study. And it'll show you currently there are 25 studies when I looked recently that are active and recruiting participants for NAFLD that are phase 1. Phase 2 studies, there are 57 studies that are active and recruiting for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And same website, phase 3 studies, the final studies that prove whether something is efficacious or not. As you can see, 15 compounds have moved through into phase 3 studies that are active and recruiting and interventional. And of course, there are many, many other interesting aspects. We know that the bacteria and the viruses that live within us are also of potential benefit. And when they are disordered, they may lead to disease as well. They predominantly live in our intestines and on our skin as well, and that's known as the microbiome. And this is an important area of research because more and more research is showing that the microbiome, particularly the microbiome living in our gut, has important effects on our overall health, particularly our metabolic health, like fatty liver disease, diabetes, weight gain, and even obesity. And there are some early trials going on in this area as well. And I'd like to end by an example. Sometimes we focus too much on things that are at late stages, and that's important for people who do have advanced conditions and chronic conditions. They do need treatments, but that's kind of like looking at this example of this highly trained paramedic EMT rescue worker who spends a lot of time training, and they do a great job of rescuing people who are drowning in the rapids. So one day, this group of individuals decides to say, well, where are all these people coming from that I'm having to rescue, spending all this time and effort and money? And they go and look upstream, and they found people are swimming happily in calm waters, not recognizing that just 100 yards down, there is a strong undertow. And putting a sign there or some other warning to tell people not to stray prevents them from going down the rapids. So looking upstream and prevention is key. And that's also an important part of research and clinical research as well. Weight loss is exceedingly important. Weight loss is extremely effective in reversing fatty liver disease, whether it's done through lifestyle modification or a medication. Lifestyle modifications so far have proven to be more effective than any medication out there. And so that is extremely important intervention, some of which is being tested in trials. One of my particular interests is looking at what I call circadian disruption. So humans and even animals are conditioned to wake and sleep at certain times and certain cycles. And sleep disruption and diet, when we eat and how we eat, are strongly linked to disruption of this clock. And that can lead to disease, including fatty liver disease. You can see it in plants. So there's this interesting trial, this study many, many years ago where they put this plant and it opens up in sunlight, and at nighttime, the leaves close. When they put this plant in a dark basement, in the morning, it still opens up. So that's an example of an internal circadian clock. We all have it. And so all physiologic processes follow this. And in this day and age, we have a lot of disruption in our circadian clock from either being overstimulated, working late, working overnight, eating late, and many other disruptions. And it's been shown that, poor sleep at night and daytime sleepiness correlates well with metabolic disease and liver disease, and that's of some interest in prevention. So a holistic approach to treatment of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or metabolic associated fatty liver disease. Of course, pharmacotherapy is really important for people with chronic liver disease and is being tested in clinical trials we talked about, but there are other clinical trials looking at weight loss, lifestyle modifications, as well as control of other associated conditions like hypertension, diabetes, and lifestyle changes, including good sleep, good nutrition, avoiding excess alcohol, and so on and so forth. And I think that's all I had, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you for your attention.
Well, doctor, thank you so much. I have to say that I think that's probably one of the the clearest presentations about clinical trials that I've heard, and I believe that for the members of our NASH Facebook group, as well as others who come to the Liver Foundation for information about these clinical trials, you certainly were very comprehensive and easy to understand with this, and so I really appreciate that. The questions that I have here, and I have some that folks had sent in to us, most of them surrounded the area of safety, and I believe that you did explain that aspect of the clinical trials very clear, that there's a lot of monitoring of this, that there's constant evaluation by those other than those who may have an interest in the trial or the product, and so the people don't. Although I mean, I don't want to say you shouldn't be concerned about that. Of course, you should be concerned about it, but in a trial that has so many overseers of that, a person can be pretty content to know that it is safe to participate in.
No, absolutely. Like I mentioned, the number of times people are monitored carefully for a clinical condition, nothing matches being in a clinical trial. So you may hear from your study coordinator every week. You may be getting blood tests every month for the clinical condition you have. If you're not in a trial, that you may be getting blood tests once every 6 months, for example, and a lot of other tests, depending on the study, that can include X-rays, fibroscans. There are numbers to call your research investigator, as well as the critic coordinator, to report any concerns you have if you notice any side effects, and they will note that, tell you what to do, and maybe involve your primary physician as well if they feel it's appropriate. So extremely safe, as well as this group of external agencies and institutional review boards that look at aggregate data to make sure that the trial is being held safely and that there is no overall concerning signals happening. And studies, trials, those safety boards often meet every 6 months to look at when enough individuals have been randomized. So I would feel very confident that if you are in a randomized clinical trial, you're being watched extremely carefully.
When you put that slide up there, it reminded me of the phrase "do no harm," which I believe is something that every doctor and nurse and medical professional takes an oath to do, and I'm sure that is at the heart. Well, the patient is at the heart of a clinical trial, but also the concern and hopefully the good outcome for that patient is really what's primary on everyone's mind. Is it ever too early to inquire about getting into a clinical trial? Like if somebody just finds out, let's say the doctor says to them that, well, you're showing some fat deposits in and around your liver, watch your diet, or whatever. Could a person, even in that early stage, look into a clinical trial?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It depends on other factors, and it depends on a lot of factors that predict your risk. But this is a chronic condition. So non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is a chronic condition. Unfortunately, it's starting at an earlier and earlier age. We're hearing from our pediatric colleagues that they are seeing this more and more in children, and we're seeing this in young adults more and more so now. And I don't want to necessarily treat people when they have cirrhosis. I want to treat people, and I want to catch people upstream so I can prevent them from getting downstream when they have advanced liver disease. If I can do that with clinical care, great. If I think there's a research trial, if you find a research trial that is targeting the upstream fatty liver disease, definitely go for it. Prevention, early action is best before you get progressive disease. Of course, if you have more advanced liver disease, there are excellent treatments out there too. So there's no stage that's too late either.
I'm going to steal your analogy of the downstream versus the paying attention to the signs upstream, because I think, boy, if there's something that very clearly tells us what prevention is all about, it's that image, and that makes so much sense in that regard. And then just the final question that I think, because you covered so much, and this one just simply says that my doctor hasn't mentioned the clinical trial. Is it something I should bring up, or because the doctor hasn't mentioned it, I'm not right for?
So it's a great question. Don't be shy. You know, if your doctor may not have time, you know, often doctors are you know, really involved in your clinical care as well. They are sometimes involved right in what they're seeing and treating what they're seeing right now. They may not necessarily think about clinical trials necessarily all the time. They may not have the time to talk about it, depending on, you know, what their day is looking like for that doctor as well. So feel free to ask them. If you don't have time or you don't get the opportunity to ask them during a clinic visit, you can send them a message. If you use things like MyChart or message, or even call their office and say, is there a clinical trial that you know of for my condition? And if you know of any, could you find out if I'm eligible, or send me some information, or pass along my information to them if you are comfortable? Or could you find out where would you suggest I talk to? So yeah, don't be shy about being your own best advocate if you are interested in being in a clinical trial.
Well, thank you so much. And you mentioned the word time a few times in there. And we want to thank you, Doctor, for your time tonight to give us this information. And as we said, your discussion this evening will be posted in our various social media as well as websites at the American Liver Foundation, so that folks moving ahead will be able to get this information. So we thank you again, Doctor, for being with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you. If you would like more information about liver disease and clinical trials and much more, you can go to our website, which is www.liverfoundation.org. You can also use our national helpline if you have any questions about your disease, about keeping your liver healthy, or about clinical trials. Our number is easy to remember. It's 1-800-GO-LIVER. We also, on our website, have a way that you can live chat with us or email us as well. Also, if you'd like to see the previous episodes of our Ask the Expert series and other educational videos, you can check out our YouTube channel. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you the next time with a brand new episode of Ask the Experts.